waiting. I hear them in the air when mother came a-stomping and gives the coldest stare. Shut the door!
Hi, I'm Kerry. This is Out of the Pit, Chapter 5. A few days later, Mary accompanied me to the hospital to visit Betty. When I arrived, I was surprised to see her looking so much better. When we got there, she agreed to join Mary and I for a chat away from the other patients and go and sit in a nearby outside area. We both walked slowly beside her while Betty shuffled along with the aid of a wheelie walker. At first she seemed pleasant, making small talk with Mary and I as we find a suitable place to sit. However, the moment we sit down, I watch her whole body shift. Her back straightens and her whole demeanour towards me suddenly changes. Her eyes glare stone cold into me, her voice sharp, demeaning and accusatory. Every harsh word directed at me designed to hurt. However, periodically she would turn to look at Mary, smile and talk sweetly to her, then return to address me in stark contrast. It was the first time Mary had ever met Betty, and I could tell she was shocked to hear Betty be so disparaging towards me. Over the years, Mary had heard a great deal about my relationship with my adoptive mother, including the abuses I had endured. However, telling and seeing are definitely two different things. I was doing all I could to remain calm and composed, but I was clearly rattled and I was starting to break. Betty's cutting words sliced into me. I could feel the tears begin to rise, threatening to expose my vulnerability. The last thing I wanted to do was cry in front of Betty. I quickly made up an excuse that I had to catch up with the nursing staff. I asked Mary if it'd be okay for her to sit alone with Betty for a while. Mary could see I needed an out quickly and indicated that she'd be fine talking to Betty in my absence. Betty didn't seem to mind this at all and exclaimed she was more than happy for me to leave her presence, but I could also see that she was suspicious. I told her I also needed a coffee as the drive was a long way and I was pretty tired. I headed off for the nurse's station to find the person in charge of Betty's care. I also wanted to find out what medical investigations and assessments had been done. I soon found the nurse's station where they introduced me to Catherine, the hospital social worker. Catherine informed me that all the assessments had not yet been done, but when they were completed, they'd be calling for a family conference. They acknowledged that Betty had come to this hospital clearly underweight and malnourished. However, she'd been doing well since being admitted. They tell me that Betty is improving, was cooperating and engaging well with everyone. I had a brief word with Catherine about the dynamics of our family and the difficulties we'd faced with Betty, as well as the state I found her home in. Unbeknown to me at the time, Catherine had been in contact with Brian over the phone and later Marla, who'd been to visit Betty recently. They had both shared a few other things with her that has helped her understand the family situation and our concerns. Before I finished speaking with her, I also informed them that I'd found a rifle in Betty's home and that I'd handed it in to the police. I thought it was important for them to know this information in assessing her current mental health state. I returned to Betty and Mary, who were, it seems, engaged in a very pleasant conversation. However, as soon as Betty saw me, her eyes went cold and a usual scowl towards me returned. She made a pointed complaint about my prolonged absence, obviously suspicious of my reasons for it. Then, without taking a breath, began to verbally tear into me again, stating that she regretted ever adopting me and how much of a disappointment I am to her. I tried to talk peaceably with her, but it was useless, and once again I could feel the tears rising within me, threatening to expose that she had made her mark. Finally, I decided I could not take it any more and stated that it was time to leave. Mary, shocked and appalled, not knowing what to say, rose to her feet. As she did, Betty, in a very sweet and nice manner, tells Mary how lovely it was to meet her and chat with her. However, in contrast, yet again, Betty only offers me a cold, sideways glance and then turns abruptly away from me, as if fleeing a repugnant smell, and retracts swiftly away and heads for her room. As I watch her leave, I'm suitably impressed on how well she is walking. She's not hanging on to her walker like she did when we first arrived. She's not leaning on it as if her life depends on it anymore, but rather walks briskly, pushing it along in front of her. She may look fragile physically, but deep down inside, this woman is steely hard, cunning, and determined, and obviously more capable than her fragile frame portrays. As Mary and I walked to the car, I asked her if Betty had been rude to her in any way. No, was her reply. They had engaged in pleasantries the whole time, chatting about grandchildren and dressmaking, which is Mary's favourite subject. I wasn't surprised. I'd seen Betty display this type of behaviour a number of times in my life. Though she'd never so readily attacked me so openly in front of others, rather choosing not to expose her true self or intentions and destroy people's opinions of her, but rather instead she would go about completely ignoring me whilst making a gushing fuss over other people. Most people never noticed or commented when it occurred. Few bothered to ever question her dismissive behaviour towards me, but I knew what it was and why she was doing it. I had displeased her in some way or another, and she was sending me a big message. Everyone is lovable today but you, Kerry. None of them knew that they were being used in a twisted game of let's reject Kerry. Effectively, Betty would go around the room at family or social gatherings, joyfully greeting and hugging people, making a disproportionate showy display of affection towards them. I would be nearby, quietly observing it all, feeling deeply embarrassed by her over-the-top loud gushing display. Interactions clearly designed only with the intentions to hurt me. Sometimes people would be so perplexed at such a show of affection and kindness from Betty, they assuming that Betty really likes them or had missed them. Truth be told, Betty would have plenty of negative things to say about them behind their backs. I just did not have the heart to tell them. They were just being conveniently used in my adopted mother's cruel games. She would blow in like a hot breeze and blow out again, and no one was the wiser but me. With all the tests, evaluation, assessments now done on Betty, I was now back at the hospital only a few days later. This time my siblings would be there with me for the family conference. Prior to attending, Betty had stipulated that she would only meet with us as long as none of us mentioned the past. Betty was cunningly ensuring she was going to control the narrative, to assume she held all the power in an attempt to keep whatever she feared coming out. I agreed to comply, but thought it was unfair of the hospital staff to pander to Betty's need to not address past dysfunctional behaviours, because those behaviours were going to prevent any positive moves forward. I knew that without addressing any negative patterns of behaviour, Betty would just revert back to the way she has always done things and nothing will change. Yes, we may talk in this meeting, and yes, she may look to agree, but it'll all be an act and nothing more. I felt rather defeated before I even entered the room. Betty appears and greets my siblings with a smile. Once again, she is leaning on her walking frame and shuffling slowly as she makes her way across the room. Her walk is very unlike her speedy retrieval the other day. She certainly has perfected her game playing well, and it's obvious for me to see. As we sit around the table, the social worker sets the boundaries for all of us to follow. Brian and Marla sit either side of Betty, while I sit opposite of them beside the social worker. To the right of her is a head nurse. To our utter surprise, the social worker begins by informing us that there is nothing wrong with Betty at all. All her medical tests and assessments have come back fine. They found nothing medically, physically, or cognitively wrong with her. Right at that moment, I watched my sister's eyes rise up in shock. She was speechless as I was, both of us in disbelief. Yes, she needed some assistance at home due to her age and could not drive anymore, and therefore she would require some assistance. However, mentally, she was able to handle all of her own affairs. I sat there listening, and when I was given the opportunity to speak, I brought up the state of her home and suggested that something be put in place to help Betty with her cleaning, washing, meals, and shopping. Betty seemed to be agreeing with the suggestions, but I was suspicious, so I asked, if supports were put in place for Betty, would she actually let these people providing those supports into her home? Brian immediately said, "Good question, Kerry." We were all keen to hear what Betty would have to say. Expecting Betty to acknowledge the question, instead she implodes, raising her voice at me, yelling that I was not supposed to bring up the past. She yelled so much that the social worker had to also raise her voice in response to get her to stop. I sat there silently, shocked that Betty finally allowed others to see the anger and contempt she had for me. I don't think I ever saw her lose it like this before in front of others. I was deeply surprised, but in one way pleased, so others could finally see what I endured all my life. Betty tries to argue with the social worker, complaining that I'd broken the agreement of the meeting. The social worker told her I'd done no such thing and that it was a legitimate question. If things were put in place to help her, would she actually allow these people to enter her home or take her to appointments, etc.? Betty didn't like the question at all and launched into another attack on me, complaining about me finding and removing the rifle. This time the social worker has to slam a hand down on the table right in front of Betty, demanding that she cease from her attacks on me. Once Betty was calmer, I gave my reasons as to why I took the rifle and the fact that it was illegal for her to have it unless she had a gun license to do so. I asked her twice, "Betty, do you have a gun license?" I thank God there was a table between us and witnesses to the whole ordeal, because if looks could kill, I'd be dead. At this point, realizing she wasn't getting anywhere yelling at me, she stopped. I was just grateful I could stay calm and composed, at least on the outside anyway. Both Marla and Brian gave their input. Neither of them received the angry outbursts that I did. Finally, we came to the end of our meeting. Betty would stay in her home with help and assistance from others. In the meantime, she would organise putting it up for sale, that she could move into a retirement village near to the cemetery where Clarence is buried. We all thought that was a really good idea. Brian said he would continue to mow her lawn and help her out until supports were in place. He had Betty's power of attorney, and I felt confident to leave her and her supports in his capable hands. It was obvious that Betty did not want me around anyway, so I was prepared to remove myself entirely. At that, Betty excused herself and left the room, leaving us alone to talk with Catherine. Now with Betty gone, we three siblings decide to have a more open chat with her, who also seems a bit more relaxed with the official meeting now over. Catherine begins by letting us know that she is extremely surprised at our support of Betty, as she has seen good parents completely abandoned for far, far less. She feels that our support is highly unusual given what she just witnessed and knowing some of our childhood circumstances. I quickly state that as adopted children, we have been trained and conditioned to be responsible for our adopted parents. At the end of the day, that is why we're adopted in the first place, I say. My siblings nod in agreement as Catherine tries to absorb what I'm saying. The complexities of adoption are never taught to those in her position or similar. They are only taught the fairy tale image of adoption, not the dark, traumatic, complex, mind-altering alternative truth that many adopted children have had to endure. Here is one social worker getting the education she should have received long before she ever sat down with us and tried to mediate with us. Such a minefield of complex issues and traumas that she had no clue about. Little do they realise how much more damage they do by being ill-informed, uneducated and unaware of adoption trauma. Adoptees in this country deserve much better. No wonder we are 35 times more likely to attempt suicide than non-adopted people. Brian breaks the awkward silence by letting us know that Betty has 2 appointments the following week and asks me to take her as he cannot do it due to work commitments. One of them is an appointment with a social worker from the first hospital, and the other is with a general practitioner. Seeing as these appointments were important, I reluctantly say yes. It was then that the social worker said something that to this day I will never forget. "Kerry, do not be alone with your mother." I looked at her questioningly, and she repeats herself. "Kerry, I do not think it is safe for you to be alone with her. Never go alone. Can someone be with you?" I could not believe what I was hearing. I looked this woman in the eye and incredulously questioned that I survived a childhood with this woman, and you're telling me that I'm not safe now as an adult? Basically, what could she say? Her face clearly showed that she was deeply concerned, and I was left with an uneasy feeling that she knew far more than she was telling me. It was then that Marla indicates that she could accompany me to take Betty to her appointments. Then, for the first time in my life, I watched my very strong little brother start to break as he recounts a story that happened when Clarence was alive, and how Betty had conspired in such a cruel manner to destroy any good relationship he had with him. Marla backs up the story that Brian shares, as she said she witnessed it firsthand. Just as we stopped speaking, Betty makes a surprise reappearance, probably wondering what we're all discussing without her. Brian and Marla walk her out. Betty is almost skipping. As I head out of the building, I see Betty calling goodbye to Marla and Brian, offering to give him a hug. She spots me over their shoulder as she hugs them goodbye, but I just keep my distance. I'm keen to leave. I just wave and let them all know I'm heading home. As I'm about to get to my vehicle, Marla catches up to me. She is obviously deeply concerned and distressed and wants to talk. With tears building up in her eyes, she asks me this question. If there is nothing wrong with Mum, if she is not mentally unwell, then that means she has understood everything she has ever done to us, hasn't she, Kerry? I looked her straight in the eyes and told my sister what I always believed to be true. I said yes. She has always known exactly what she was doing and is doing today, and I finally feel vindicated that I've been right about Betty all along. I watched my sister, heavily slumped and defeated, walk back to her car. Yes, waking up to reality can be a hard, heavy walk, especially the one that demolishes every frame of reality you have ever thought or ever knew. When your rug of denial is pulled out right from beneath your feet, you grasp frantically, trying not to fall. Bewildered and in shock, you try to prevent falling into a dark hole. When you fall, you lay there in the darkness. You have to recalibrate to find the light and find a way out. Unfortunately, many stay within this darkness, unwilling to move. Over time, it encapsulates you and holds you as an eternal prisoner. As I watch my sister leave, I wonder if she will stay in this darkness of denial or fight to find her way out into the light.
The war drums go on beating. I hear them in the air. When Mother came a-stomping and gives the coldest stare. Shut the door. Open the door. Shut the door again. Yes, Mother came a-stomping and caused my heart to dread. The war drums go on beating where there should be peace instead. And Mother's love is missing. That caused my heart to dread. I'm dying in the carnage, begging to be freed. on beating. When will they go away? The war drums go on beating. Will they end today? Open the door.
Shut the door.
Open the door again.
When will this war be over?
That my mother plays.
I do not
Like this game. Yes, when will this war be over? That my mother liked to play. Open the door.
shut the door.
Open the door again. Please come to save me. I can't take it anymore. Set me free from the war drums that mother likes to play.
Yes, mother likes to play.
Yes, mother likes to play.
Yes, set me free from the war drums.
Mother likes to play.